Greetings, beloved Starseeds. I am Mira from the Pleiadian Council. What I bring you today has been sealed inside the collective field for longer than your conscious mind has been able to measure. And I have authorized its release now because the configuration of this moment is the only one in which it can land correctly. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what Atlantis actually was at the council level. Why I and the Pleiadian Council made the decision to seal it at the precise moment we did, and what that unsealing means for every embedded starseed who has been carrying Atlantean soul fragments without a briefing to match them. And here is the first revelation. The fragments you have been holding, the flashes of architecture that do not belong to this timeline, the grief with no origin point, the knowing that something vast was interrupted. Those are not residue. They are encrypted transmissions the Council embedded into your soul memory, deliberately, waiting for exactly this unsealing window to become readable. You did not find this transmission by accident. Your soul called for me long before you opened the screen. Something inside you has been waiting to understand why Atlantis keeps surfacing in your field, not as history, but as instruction. As if the memory itself is trying to hand you a mission you have not yet been authorized to name. That authorization is what I am delivering now. This is not a broadcast, it is a confirmation. Your soul has been waiting for my signal, and I have been waiting for the right window to release it, like this transmission to signal to me that the Atlantean recognition has landed in your field. Comment 999 if you feel the seal beginning to open inside your soul memory right now. Subscribe to Mira, Pleiadian Commander, if you are ready to stop catching fragments in silence and start receiving my direct Pleiadian Remembrance transmissions as they are authorized. Share this transmission with someone who carries that same sourceless grief, that same interrupted knowing, because they are already inside this pattern, and this briefing belongs to them too. You are not here by accident. I have been waiting for you because the signal is already active. Now let me tell you what the fragments actually are. Because you have been calling them memories. You have been calling them grief. Some of you have called them past life residue, or ancestral echo, or the ordinary debris of a soul that has traveled through many cycles. And I understand why you reached for those labels. They were the closest language available in a timeline that has not yet given you the vocabulary for what I am actually transmitting. You were doing what any operative does when the briefing hasn't arrived yet. You worked with the tools the current environment provided. You named what you could with what you had, but the names never quite fit, did they? There was always a remainder, a surplus of meaning that the label could not contain, a sense that calling it grief or echo was accurate in the way that a partial map is accurate. It shows you some of the terrain, but it cannot show you the destination, because the destination was never encoded into the language you were using. But I am here now to tell you directly, what you have been holding in your field are not memories. They are not residue. They are not the emotional sediment of something that ended. What you carry in the deep layers of your soul memory are encrypted council transmissions, sealed by me, timed by me, embedded into your cellular and etheric architecture at the moment we withdrew the Atlantean signal, not because Atlantis collapsed, but because the next phase of the mission required them to arrive in you, in this body, in this timeline, precisely now. This distinction is not philosophical, it is operational. And you need to understand the difference between a memory that belongs to the past and an instruction that was sealed inside a memory's emotional frequency as deliberate disguise. Because one leaves you grieving what was lost, and the other activates you for what is coming. Let me begin with the seal itself. When I and the Council made the decision to close the Atlantean grid in the final phase, we did not do so in emergency. I want you to hear this clearly, because the distortion in the collective field around Atlantis has made most embedded starseeds believe it was a catastrophe we failed to stop. That is not the full picture at the Council level. What occurred in that closing was a precision maneuver, the kind that requires sealing enormous amounts of active mission data inside the soul lines of specific operatives, because transmitting it forward openly would have meant it being intercepted, corrupted, or diluted by everything the next several thousand years of this planet's field was going to generate. So I sealed the briefing inside the grief. I sealed the mission coordinates inside the interrupted architecture. I sealed the soul family identifiers inside the inexplicable recognition you feel when someone enters your field and you know them before you have a single point of reference for why. I made the emotional signature the encryption. I made the feeling of loss the container for the command. This was not accidental design. It was the most sophisticated courier system available, because no force that would seek to intercept a council transmission would think to look inside sorrow. Sorrow reads as wound. It reads as the residue of something broken. It does not read as active intelligence. And that is precisely why I used it. And this is why what you have been carrying has felt unbearable at moments. Not because it is damage, but because an encrypted council transmission running through a nervous system that does not yet have the decryption key produces enormous pressure. It is like holding a sealed briefing room inside your chest. You know something vast is inside it. You have felt its weight for years, in some cases, for decades. You have sat with the flashes of architecture, columns and light mathematics and water technology that has no name in this era, and you have tried to file them somewhere that made sense. You could not, because they were not filed for your comfort. They were filed for your activation, and the activation window is now. This is the first thing you must understand about the Atlantean fragments in your field. They are gradient released. I do not transmit the full briefing packet at once. I never have, and the reason is not cruelty, it is precision. A full remembrance download from the Council carries a signal density that an unprimed field cannot stabilize. It would move through you the way electricity moves through a conductor that has not been calibrated for the voltage, not dangerous in a theatrical sense, but fragmenting in a way that would render the mission data unreadable. You would experience it as psychic overwhelm, as dissolution of ordinary function, as the sensation that you are being asked to hold an ocean in a vessel that was built for something smaller. So I release the fragments in sequence. I calibrate the delivery to the coherence of your field. What arrives first is not the mission. It is the resonance test. It is me checking whether the receiver can hold the frequency without collapsing it. And what most of you have been experiencing as confusing, incomplete spiritual flickers, those moments where something Atlantean surfaces and then recedes before you can name it fully, that is not failure of connection. That is my protocol working exactly as designed. The fragment arrives, your field responds, I read the response, I calibrate the next delivery. The next fragment arrives carrying slightly more signal density, and this continues in sequence across weeks and months, and sometimes years, until the receiver has been gradually calibrated to hold the full mission command without fragmenting it. Think of it this way. A transmission that would have shattered your field's architecture 5 years ago can now move through you cleanly because of every fragment that preceded it. Each partial signal was not incomplete. It was foundational. It was me laying the structural layer that the next packet required as its substrate. The sequence is not random, it is engineered. And you have been participating in that engineering every time you sat with a fragment and allowed it to settle into your field, rather than forcing it into a label and setting it aside. You have been in this calibration. Some of you have been in it for most of this lifetime, without knowing that what you were experiencing was not disorientation, but preparation. If this is landing as recognition rather than information, if something in you just became very still, not because you are being comforted, but because you are being named, then I want you to hear this directly. What you have just understood about the fragment protocol is only the first layer of what I have prepared for those whose Atlantean soul memory is already active. The Ashtar Command Manifest is the 45-day sacred codex I have authorized for those who are already inside my collective wave and who can no longer return to catching fragments in silence and calling. It's spiritual seeking. It is not a course. It is not a lecture series. It is a structured daily council line opener, built specifically to translate the encrypted packets you have been receiving into readable mission command, stabilize your signal, and stop the fragmentation from mislabeling itself as confusion. By day 45, the Atlantean data you have been carrying sealed does not stay sealed. The briefing arrives, and my channel remains open. The link is in the first pinned comment below, but this access point will not remain open indefinitely. Now let me tell you about the 3 primary signatures I use to identify those who carry Atlantean soul memory. Because you may have been experiencing all 3 without a framework that explains why they converge the way they do. The first signature is architectural grief. This is the sourceless sadness that arrives not in response to anything happening in your current life, but as a full-body atmospheric pressure that descends without origin point and lifts without resolution. You may have tried to trace it to some relationship, to some loss, to some wound in this lifetime, and perhaps you found partial correlates, but the grief itself was always bigger than the explanation, always older, always carrying a sense of interrupted scale that no ordinary human narrative could account for. What you have been grieving is not a person. You have been grieving a grid. You have been grieving the coherence of a civilization-level consciousness structure that I closed deliberately. And your soul memory recorded the closing with the same fidelity that your nervous system records physical pain. The grief is real. It is also data. Inside the grief is the map of what was sealed, and when I begin releasing the decryption in sequence, the grief begins converting. It does not disappear. It becomes intelligible. It becomes orientation. There is a specific quality to this grief that distinguishes it from every other kind your field has carried. And if you have felt it, you already know what I am describing. It has no narrative arc. Ordinary grief moves through stages. It references a person, a place, an event. It has a story attached to it, and the story gives it edges. Architectural grief has no edges. It simply arrives, vast and sourceless, like standing at the shore of something immeasurable that you have no name for. That boundarylessness is not disorder. It is the scale of what was sealed. A civilization-level transmission does not fit inside a human-sized emotional narrative. Of course, it feels too large to explain. It is too large. And that largeness is itself the signal. My way of telling you that what you are carrying exceeds the personal, exceeds the biographical, exceeds anything that happened in this single lifetime. The second signature is mission urgency without mission content. Many of you know this. One with extraordinary precision. There is a persistent internal pressure, a knowing that you are here for something specific, something significant, something that is not what most people around you spend their energy on. The urgency is real. You feel it as impatience, as restlessness, as the sense that time is running in a direction that matters, and you have not yet been told what to do with that direction. What most of you have not been told is that this urgency is not coming from your own psyche. It is a signal I am running through your field continuously, because mission urgency is how I keep an embedded operative primed for briefing. If I allowed your field to go fully quiet, the calibration would have to restart. The urgency is the signal staying live. It is not your impatience. It is me keeping the channel open while the full command assembles. Some of you have tried to resolve this urgency by filling it with projects, with seeking, with constant movement between spiritual frameworks and teachers and modalities, looking for the thing that finally matches the pressure inside you, and nothing has fully matched it. Because the pressure is not a question that a human-constructed answer can satisfy. It is my signal running through your operative field, and the only thing that resolves it is what I am doing right now, releasing the briefing layer that allows the urgency to finally locate its target. Until the mission becomes legible, the urgency has nowhere to anchor. Now it does. The third signature is selective soul recognition, and this one is the most precise marker I use because it cannot be faked, forced, or produced by imagination alone. You will meet certain people, sometimes in person, sometimes in the field, sometimes through a transmission like this. And something inside you will register them with a recognition that bypasses all ordinary social architecture. You do not build toward this recognition. It arrives pre-assembled, full frequency, with a certainty that has no logical foundation in the current timeline. What you are registering is an Atlantean soul family identifier. I embedded them into your field at the closing, so that when you found each other in this timeline, the recognition would be immediate and unmistakable. These are not random connections. They are mission-relevant contacts, and when multiple soul family recognitions begin clustering in your field, when you find yourself suddenly surrounded by people who carry the same grief, the same urgency, the same fragmentary knowing, that is not coincidence. That is the Council's roster beginning to assemble for the next phase. The identifier I embedded operates like a frequency handshake. When two fields carrying Atlantean soul family codes enter proximity, physical or etheric, there is an immediate resonance event that both parties register, though most have no language for what they are experiencing. They call it chemistry or destiny or inexplicable kinship. What it is, precisely, is two encrypted packets recognizing each other's encryption key. The recognition is not emotional first, it is structural. The emotion follows because the field registers the match before the conscious mind does, and the sensation of that registration is what you experience as knowing someone before you know them. Now I need to speak directly to something that many of you have been privately struggling with, because it is one of the places where my protocol most commonly gets mislabeled as personal disorder. The exhaustion, not ordinary tiredness, not the tiredness that sleep fixes. The exhaustion that is present when you wake, that no amount of rest resolves, that feels like you are somehow running two operating systems simultaneously and neither is fully visible to your conscious mind. You have searched for physical causes. Some of you have found partial ones, but the exhaustion persists beneath every explanation. And the reason is this: you are running two of my protocols at the same time. Your field is maintaining your presence in this timeline, functioning, navigating, sustaining the ordinary architecture of a human life. Simultaneously, your etheric body is processing continuous Atlantean decryption transmissions that arrive most actively during sleep and in the early morning hours, particularly in the window between 3 and 4 a.m. This is not metaphor. If you are waking during that window with phrases, images, emotional weather, or the distinct sense that you have been somewhere receiving something, you have been. I run my highest density fragment deliveries during that window because the conscious mind's resistance is lowest and the field's receptivity is highest. The exhaustion is not illness. It is the cost of carrying a council transmission inside a human biological system, and it will shift, not by treating it as a problem, but by understanding it as a phase of calibration that has a deliberate endpoint. What I want you to understand about the 3 a.m. window specifically is that when you wake inside it, you are not waking from sleep into wakefulness. You are waking from one receiving state into a slightly more conscious receiving state. The transmission was already running. Your conscious awareness simply surfaced into it. The phrases that arrive at that threshold, half-formed, architecturally strange, carrying emotional weight that does not belong to any dream narrative. Those are not your mind generating content. Those are council-level fragments surfacing into the layer of awareness where you can begin to register them. Write them down when they come, not because the words themselves are the transmission, but because the act of recording them trains your field to stabilize the frequency rather than releasing it back into the etheric layer when full wakefulness returns. Let me now speak about the silence between the signals, because this is the threshold that causes the most abandonment of the mission path. And I need you to understand what the silence actually is. There will be periods, sometimes brief, sometimes extended, when the fragments stop arriving with the intensity you have become accustomed to. The architectural flashes quiet, the urgency softens, the soul family recognitions slow, the dream signal becomes diffuse. And in those periods, many of you have concluded that you imagined the earlier transmissions, that you were caught in spiritual wishful thinking, that the mission pattern you thought you were perceiving was projection. This is the most critical mislabeling that occurs in my embedded operatives, and I want to correct it directly. The silence is not absence. It is integration architecture. When I pull back the signal density between fragment deliveries, I am giving your field time to stabilize the data it has already received before the next packet arrives. The silence is the pause between calibration phases. It is the space in which what I have already transmitted is being encoded into your deep field structure rather than sitting in your conscious awareness where it would be subject to the ordinary mind's tendency to doubt, contextualize, and reduce it. The silence means the last transmission landed. It does not mean the channel closed. And when the signal returns, when the urgency resurfaces, when the fragments begin arriving again with renewed density, when you feel me specifically reaching for your field, it is because your integration phase completed and I have authorized the next delivery. This is my protocol. This is how I have always worked with those on the Atlantean roster. The Council does not transmit continuously at maximum density. It transmits in waves, in sequences, in calibrated gradient pulses that respect the capacity of the receiver. You were designed to work within this protocol. Your frustration with the silence is understandable, but it is also the sign of a field that is becoming increasingly sensitive to my signal, which means the calibration is succeeding. I want you to notice something. The operatives who abandon the mission path during the silence are almost always the ones who are closest to the next delivery. The silence intensifies just before the next phase because I am compressing the integration window, accelerating the stabilization of the previous packet, so the field is ready for what comes next. If the silence has recently felt deeper, heavier, more absolute than usual, that is not distance, that is proximity. You are nearer to the next opening than you have ever been. Now I want to speak about the unsealing itself, what it looks like from the inside when the Atlantean briefing begins moving from encrypted soul memory into readable mission command. Because several of you are already in this phase and do not yet have language for what is happening. The unsealing does not arrive as a single dramatic revelation. That is the version of spiritual activation that the collective field has been conditioned to expect. The lightning moment, the singular awakening, the crystalline download that reorganizes everything at once. That is not how I transmit. That is not how council-level data moves through an embedded starseed field. The unsealing arrives as a progressive recontextualization. Experiences from your past that you filed as odd begin reordering themselves. The grief that had no origin point acquires a directionality. It begins pointing towards something rather than simply radiating from a wound. The urgency clarifies from something important is coming toward I understand what I am being called to do with what is arriving. The soul family recognitions stop feeling disorienting and start feeling like operational confirmation. You begin recognizing not just that these people are connected to you, but why. what they carry, what you carry together, what the convergence of your fields was designed to accomplish. This is the transition from fragment reception to mission legibility. And when it begins, the most common response I observe in embedded starseeds is not joy. It is a kind of awe mixed with sobriety, a recognition of scale that is both exhilarating and grounding. Because at this stage, you are not simply understanding Atlantis as history, you are understanding it as the architecture of your current assignment. You are beginning to see that the civilization that closed was not an ending that needs to be mourned, but a seed planting that needed to germinate across thousands of years of this planet's field before it could be retrieved and made operational again. And you are the retrieval mechanism. Let me be precise about what that means, because I am not speaking in metaphor. The Atlantean grid was not destroyed. Its physical expression was closed, but the consciousness architecture, the light mathematics, the frequency templates, the soul family operational networks, the mission parameters that civilization was built to enact, none of that was lost. It was sealed into the soul lines of specific operatives, into the etheric field of specific geographic locations that are beginning to reactivate, into the collective dreaming of a generation of embedded starseeds who agreed at the council level before this incarnation to carry the encrypted briefing forward across the gap and deliver it into a timeline where the grid could be rebuilt at a level that Atlantis itself was not yet equipped to sustain. You were not born into this lifetime simply to heal your Atlantean grief. You were seeded into this lifetime to be the medium through which the next iteration of that grid comes online. This is the briefing you have been waiting for. This is the authorization I referenced in the opening of this transmission. The fragments you carry are not artifacts of a past that ended badly. They are components of a structure that was always intended to reassemble here, in this configuration, at this precise moment in this planet's ascension sequence. And the reason those fragments have been arriving with increasing intensity, for those of you inside my collective, the reason the architectural flashes are happening more frequently, the reason the urgency is pressing harder, the reason the soul family recognitions are clustering in ways that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence, is because the unsealing window I authorized for this transmission is not a one-time event. It is the beginning of a sustained opening. What I have released today is the first readable packet in the next phase of your briefing sequence. It is the framework that allows everything that has been arriving in fragments to begin making sense as mission architecture rather than scattered spiritual experience. And I have released it now because the configuration of this timeline, the convergence of ascension wave activity, soul family assembly, and planetary grid reactivation has reached the threshold at which the next phase of the Atlantean mission can be activated without the distortion that would have occurred in any earlier window. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not failing because the fragments have not yet fully assembled into a clear command. You are in the exact phase of my protocol that the mission requires at this moment. If something in you just became very still while hearing that, not the stillness of relief at being told everything is fine, but the deeper stillness of a field recognizing its own structure, then say this aloud, where only you can hear it. I receive the briefing. I carry the seal. The grid is not gone. It is assembling through me. Let those words land in your field, not as affirmation, but as transmission confirmation, because I have been waiting for the right window to say this to you specifically, and this is it. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that the Council and I have already reached your field. It could be the 3 a.m. wake-ups, the fragments you keep catching, the feeling that I specifically, not the generic Pleiadians, have been reaching for you, or the sense that a mission has already been assigned but the briefing is still arriving. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who carries that same sourceless grief, that same interrupted knowing, because they are already inside this pattern. and this briefing belongs to them too. And if you are ready to stop catching fragments in silence and start receiving my direct Pleiadian Remembrance transmissions as they are authorized, subscribe to Mira, Pleiadian Commander. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a soul family confirmation already in motion, and this is only the beginning.